Hey guys, I'm Viva Verbatim, and if there's two things you need to know for today, it's that I hate self-insert Mary Sue types and that I am a hypocrite. Today we're going to be discussing the most shameless of my self-inserts, literally sporting my name for a long time, as well as my ideal face and life. This character is a reflection of my changing character over time, as well as places in my life where I've become kind of stunted. If anything, this character is incredibly flawed to the point of mania, so he's basically me having my cake and eating it too, with me avoiding many of the more blatant Mary Sue tendencies of the character, but keeping the typical overpoweredness of one. Luckily, they're far from a major player in this overarching story, and while there are a few important story beats they contribute to, ultimately this character is who I wish I could be if I was part of a team of teenage heroes, and I don't want to drag that out much. But on that note, let's get into the life and times of Emilio Eli Alvaro, alias Purgatorio, a video which I'll tentatively be calling the part 1 video for his sister Olivia. Technically, the history of this character started back as far as 2004 when I was born, but we're not going to be going back that far. Eli/Elizabeth Alvaro / my actual name that I won't be giving out because of privacy is a character I created alongside a version of my sister, and while they didn't have much in common in terms of powers, the two were drawn out to be part of a team called the Formidable Five, that also included my brother and parents. Pretty ironic considering how absent our parents and brother are in the current canon. Elizabeth, original hero name, and watch the gag reflex now, Zinger, started out as Baby Liz's Guide to Self-Inserts. Being a knockoff of Raven with demonic shadow power she got from falling into the Shadow Realm and accidentally stealing something called the Shadow Crystal from the Shadow Lord. Redundancy aside, the interconnected story of the Shadow Lord and Liz's shared unhappiness with their circumstances is kind of the first world building I ever came up with that is actually shaped more than you would think. As Elizabeth's character changed from Zinger to Marionette, Puppeteer to Puppet Master to Bunraku, the world building I set up changed around her. The Shadow Realm became Purgatorio, a realm with a deity-like personification of the same name. The Shadow Lord and his subjects became the Chaotic Fleet, the Shadow Crystal and its powers. Well, it's still called the Shadow Crystal, but the element is much less straightforward, or at least a little more interesting, I would hope. But anyway, Elizabeth quickly became an embodiment of the facets of my identity that aren't clear by my outward appearance. Over time, I started to draw her as a character more obviously Hispanic, I toyed with what gender I wanted her to be. That's not to say I identify as a guy, but I am saying that if I were to make a character for myself in a game like D&D, I'd be a frickin' owl bard named Mercutio, don't at me. Hopefully that makes sense. And I gave her the friends I lost along the way in life for moving around and otherwise being a massive asshole. Her hair got shorter, her support system became larger, and the issues she had became more blatant as I became a little more self-reflective. I realized she was getting a little too personal, so I started to distance myself from her in this revision. I think I should leave this character behind and not try to live through my paper horcruxes and through the what-ifs. So here she's a little different, a little closer to my sister's character to actually hammer home the fact that they're siblings. Eli is inspired by me in appearance obviously, but also very influenced by the episode Puppet Master and its exploration of bloodbending in Avatar: The Last Airbender. You can also throw in Raven and her demon powers, and these days he's a little bit more influenced by Day of the Dead and Mayan imagery, since a lot of my family is from Latin America, specifically Guatemala. Plus, for my initial research, Mayan mythology just seems so freaking insane and clever, and it puts Marvel world building to shame in some ways, honestly, so hell yeah, I'm taking a piece of that since Namor's not really cutting it for me. The Alvaros are where presentation and genetic makeup gets complicated. Emilio Alvaro is 17 years old at the start of the series. By the end of season 4, he's 31 years old, though he and other creatures like the Alvaros stop aging at their prime, at around 25 years old. That said, he's part Skella hybrid or Gravewalker, a small sect of mystics that were scattered across the Americas and are said to have the power to wear the skin of the recently deceased. He's about 50% Gravewalker on his Guatemalan side, making him half Hispanic and half white, with half of that Hispanic half being Skella hybrid blood. Hopefully future me will make a pie chart to make that word vomit make sense. He's 5'2", really short compared to the other characters, especially his sister later on. He has an older brother Gabriel and a younger sister Olivia. A little fun fact about Eli is that he's had the most hero costume variations, with very few drawings featuring the same costume until around 5 years ago. While the others followed a gradual process of improvement and tweaking, Eli's uniform was constantly changing with no rhyme or reason for a long time, because as a character representing me, I just gave him clothes that I would wear. I eventually incorporated that into his story by making him interested in clothing design. His birthday is June 24th, 2027. He's a cisgender dude and he's pansexual. That's not reflective of me, just to make that clear. I'm not pan, but I think Eli would benefit from having a very specific label to stick with. But like me, he's Christian, and I'm going to go ahead and say that he's a less zealous Catholic, since Catholics are the sect of Christianity that believe purgatory exists. Plus, Catholicism has historically shaped traditions in the Americas such as Dia de los Muertos, which was an inspiration for Eli's sister. Also, he's fluent in English and Spanish because wish fulfillment. I'm realizing now that a lot of this is just wish fulfillment, the character, but Eli gets to be happy, goddammit, and his Spanish is beautiful. Time for me to BS some world building real quick. Keep in mind that most of this first bit is just that, world building. What matters for Eli is the purgatory stuff we'll be getting to. So the Gravewalkers were part of a Mayan legend that I made up from thousands of years before the Alvaros, around the fourth creation. That would take a lot of explaining, but basically, the Mayan gods made several attempts to create beings that would worship them out of objects in nature. They tried making animals, but animals couldn't speak or worship. Wooden people didn't work. Clay, I think they became monkeys. And the fourth attempt was with maize, corn, and the corn people were the first humans. So basically the first Skella hybrids were made adjacently with humanity. Again, without getting too complicated, there are a ton of death gods that exist in the Mayan underworld, Xibalba. And while the living world was being populated by man to worship all the gods, they wanted to create their own creatures to worship them specifically. They tried to create their own humans to inhabit the death realm using the feathers of the messenger owls of Xibalba. The creatures they made were sentient, but technically they weren't anything at all. Nothing of flesh, at least. They couldn't take on a form of their own and existed merely as wind. Cast out into the living world away from their disappointed creators, the creatures of wind found that they could take on the form of man by puppeting the corpses of the deceased and making them dance in their powerful winds, given life and a voice by soulless flesh. Thus, the legend of the first Gravewalkers was born. The parts of the legends that are actually factual are up for debate. Perhaps there were witch doctors that had given spirits life through corpses thousands of years ago. Perhaps the Alvaros were from a distant line of Benega hybrids, which are these similar skeleton aliens. It would explain the creature's connection to wind and fire, which is a shared feature for both races. But they also could have been half-ghosts, though no explanation fully explains the behavior and abilities of Gravewalkers, which differs wildly from the first documented members of their species. The blood of the few Gravewalkers left inhabiting the world has been diluted by interspecies relations with humans. But descendants of the first of their race, more commonly called Skella hybrids in later generations, have magical gifts with connections to fire, water, earth, and/or air, though air is a sort of default. Gravewalkers are ironically weak against fire, specifically hellfire, which can kill them. Another thing to note is that Skella hybrids have two forms, a human one and a second skeleton form rather than the form of a corpse. Though if that skeleton form were to be destroyed, they can become a vulnerable wind body temporarily, and can inhabit a corpse in place of that secondary form, though they typically smell bad in their human and corpse form for a while until the body and corpse assimilate into a body and skeleton form, with each mirroring each other after assimilation. Gravewalkers can exist indefinitely, since they stop aging at around 25, but none have been documented to have lived longer than 150 years, in line with some of the longest living human beings on Earth. Last really important thing, Gravewalkers gain their secondary skeleton form during puberty, and generally the gene does not present in men in the family, with only a couple of men every few generations gaining access to a skeleton form. Eli's a curious case of elemental fusion. He accessed his skeletal form for the first time during a time of stress, the fire that killed his parents, and after the event he became comatose for a year, not committing to life or death. He spent that time in Purgatorio, a mirror to the death realm but a more hellish reflection of it. Like with Clara Barton from our last video, Eli was imbued with the power of Purgatory by having the shadow crystal I mentioned in his history permanently chained to his neck. But the person who gave him his power was also imbued with the power of Purgatorio, meaning that Eli can only wield a fraction of the realm's actual power. Upon waking up, Eli found out that his skeleton powers were overwritten and corrupted by Purgatory, replaced with the ability to create soul conduits. Weak, shadowy bodies that could house Purgatory souls and give them temporary access to the human world as his puppets. His powers start out very weak as he tries to suppress them, but by the time he accepts his gifts, he can command legions of the souls damned to Purgatorio. Admittedly, Eli isn't the most quirky character. He's pretty quiet most of the time and he struggles with basic social cues, though he does come alive a bit when he's being overprotective of his sister or when he's discussing costuming or design. Eli could talk about his passion for hours, and he tries not to because he doesn't want to annoy anyone. Oh, and there is a little more personal wish fulfillment for me, but he rides a motorcycle that he fixed up for himself. Since he doesn't like his new powers much, he initially stays on the bike in battle as a sort of getaway driver and long-distance attacker. While he's a skilled biker, he completely freezes up in a car and is a terrible driver when he has to be at the wheel. His attempts to get his driver's license over the course of the series become an ongoing gag that gets more and more absurd, as Eli returns from his driver's test either with stories of hilarious failures, from the simplest things like reading a pedestrian sign as an 80-mile-per-hour speed limit, or coming home with mysterious injuries. Olivia is Emilio's sister. As his last living family member, she is the most precious thing to him, and he tries a little too hard to protect her from harm. He's very suffocating, but it's because she's the light in his world after the loss of his parents, and he knows without her there isn't much left for him. Even if his teammates are his new family, his blood family comes first. It takes a while, though, for Eli to accept Olivia as more than someone to protect and recognize that Olivia has grown into his equal despite being much younger than him. A year without her parents and comatose brother changed her, which we'll really dive into in the next video. Romeo is Eli's best friend. With both of them having their fair share of internal struggles, Eli having social anxiety and Romeo being schizophrenic, the two bond over their hardships and support one another during especially bad times. They feel comfortable talking about the dark times in their lives with one another, and while they aren't together, they have a sort of bromance that lasts throughout the entire series. Katie was Eli's childhood friend. Eli felt like his hopes at becoming a designer were hindering her more realistic photographer aspirations, so he feels a sense of guilt around her but still cares about her. The two bond more than Eli and Romeo over the arts, although their distance for years has caused them to shift ways and find closer friendships in other people. They're still close, but Eli finds himself clinging to what family he has left in his sister and prioritizes her over Katie. Reagan and Eli's relationship is a little more complex. Reagan is Romeo's sort of love interest, but other than valuing him as someone close to his friend, Eli and Reagan take opposite approaches to their differences from other people, which makes them kind of an interesting pair to kind of talk to each other. Reagan is implied to be somewhere on the autistic spectrum. Maybe, I don't know yet, but he doesn't mask or try to pretend he thinks like everyone else, because his friends were villains that loved him for his differences. Eli isn't exactly coded as having autism. I'm not autistic, so it's not my place to have a character so similar to me think in a way I could never deeply understand. But Eli does mask for his own reasons, because he doesn't want to rock the boat or make anyone like him less. That's why he doesn't want to talk about what he's passionate about most of the time, because he just doesn't want people to think he's weird. The two become friends, and Ray serves as a figure that shakes up the status quo for Eli by letting him be his full self, not the half-self he tried to present himself as for so long. Eli and Clara have both died and been brought back from the dead, though Clara's guidance through it by the Guardians of the Death Realm have made her more open to talking about it with Eli and the others. Eli is less dead than Clara, but their differing experiences in the realms have shaped their views of the world and their discourse. Their relationship is mostly restricted to teammate camaraderie, but they can get especially philosophical with each other, and it leads to a very unique dynamic in later story arcs. The full story of the alchemist will be saved for Olivia's video. But Eli hates the alchemist for taking advantage of his sister's youth and her lack of support while Eli was in a coma for the sake of his own personal gain. He also finds out that the fire that killed their parents may not have been an accident, which again contributes to Eli's hatred for a man he technically never met until after the man's plans had already been achieved. Before Season 1, Eli Alvaro gained the ability to shapeshift into his skeleton hybrid self, but it didn't occur naturally for him. The skeleton transformation only presented fully in women and hadn't been present at all in male-born family members in generations. But no son of their family had spent the latter half of their teenage years replaying their parents' screens in their head either. Eli grew up with extreme social anxiety, and despite having kind parents and siblings, he grew up feeling isolated. Aside from a friend he made in his past named Katie, Eli had dreams of becoming a fashion designer, so he made the most of his spare time by creating fashion pieces with emphasis on elegance and practicality, often bringing Katie and Olivia into his hobby by having Olivia test the range of motion each piece offered and having Katie photograph his favorite pieces. When he was a teenager, Katie moved away and Eli had no one left but his family, but what little piece he had was sent up in flames by the fire that killed his loving parents. Eli was close to them when it happened, being on the other side of their bedroom door in their final painful moments but too cowardly to act. He assumed his sister Olivia was dead too, and it destroyed him. With seemingly no one else to turn to, Eli walked directly into the flames and accepted his death. It was something he wouldn't tell anyone for a long time out of guilt. He didn't die, obviously, but technically he didn't come out of the fire alive, either. For a year, Eli existed in a limbo state between life and death as his body recovered, but his mind fractured in purgatory. He was forced to relive his parents' death over and over and over as his soul echoed with its last fully alive memories. He had a chance meeting with a prisoner of the realm during the Endless Cycle, a creature that only called himself the Lord of Shadows. He, one imbued with the realm and forced to reside there, pieced Eli's soul back together with a part of his own that resided in the shadow crystal he chained to Eli's neck, forcing Eli to fuse with the creature and with purgatory itself. When he finally woke up, he was in a hospital bed alongside his sister, Olivia, who had mysteriously remained happy, healthy, and well cared for despite a year without their parents. Emilio woke up from his coma as a not entirely stable human being. His anxieties and paranoia had increased tenfold after spending a year in his own personal hell, and it was weeks before he was even able to speak again, or at least say anything other than the last words he said to his parents that he'd been forced to repeat over and over. Olivia chose to join a hero team led by Cassidy Joyce after receiving a mysterious upgrade to her skeleton form, and Eli, desperate to keep an eye on the only family he had left, joined her to keep her safe. Again, it would be another few weeks before he was comfortable talking to people, but Romeo, being the only other guy on the team at the time, made the effort to reach out to him and the two became friends. Eli encouraged Romeo's sense of battle strategy, while Romeo encouraged Eli to share his passion for design with their team leader Cassidy. Because of their mutual support for each other, Romeo became somewhat of a secondary leader to the team, and Eli went on to design the costumes for the first 8 members of their little squad. Over the course of the series, Eli is a bit of a wild card in terms of usefulness across episodes, though most of his actions as a hero were dictated by Olivia, since he just wants to protect her as best as he can, even when she really doesn't ask for it. He learns to accept Olivia's independence and to rediscover his own interests as he realizes that even after death, life still goes on and he has to do the same. While not the best hero at first, he doesn't really use his powers much in the first season. He starts to grow into his own and finding what he's good at, and contributing to the team in those ways. He's able to accomplish this in several episodes. In the episode Only Perfection Will Do, he meets up with his old friend Katie, and he inevitably comes to the conclusion that he can raise funds for his team by designing uniforms for other heroes. In the episode Phantom Con, Eli is left alone at a comic horror convention after his friends leave him behind, and he starts to become more comfortable in his own company. During the entire Alchemist mini-arc, when he discovers what his sister was up to in the year of his absence, he realizes that she is capable of looking after herself, and she starts to back off a little in terms of dictating her life choices. In Season 2, Eli is very much a background character, though he acts as a supportive figure to Reagan, an important AWOL villain character that the heroes have to look after. Reagan, like Eli, can go off on tangents about his interests, and Eli is one of the few people on the team that actually listens. Though Eli spent much of the second season becoming comfortable with himself and giving Olivia space to be free, it's in this season that Ray helps Eli ease up a bit, unmasking himself and coming into his own as a positive and lovable hero, much like his younger sister. Eli also becomes a little less wary about using his powers, letting the power of Purgatory flow through him completely, as after a season of keeping it contained, Eli was experiencing his own version of Romeo's overflow. Purgatory started to flood into the living world through him and into the dreams of his teammates across several episodes, so he had to deal with it somehow. Eli doesn't have any episodes specific to him this season, since, again, he's a background character after getting way too much screen time in Season 1. In Season 3, Eli goes to space with Clara, Avery, and Romeo, and this is kind of Eli's last time to shine. In an in-between seasons episode, Eli is forced to assimilate with a villain that he killed after his body was destroyed by them. So Eli's appearance in Season 3 is slightly different, ironically with him having come into his own in a different body. On the ship, Eli and Clara have a conversation about the idea of body swapping or possessing dead bodies. It becomes a philosophical debate about whether giving life to dead flesh is ethical, whether prolonging life is better than dying, and if there's any profound purpose to their shared experience of being given a second life. It's meant to set up the idea that Clara and Eli, with mirror positions on the matter, are symbolic conduits for the ideas of the realms they're imbued to. Clara being imbued with the Death Realm, a realm more like heaven, and Eli with Purgatorio, a realm more like hell. When they're all separated, Eli and Romeo get lost in Purgatory together. Eli encounters the foot soldiers of the one that gave him his abilities, learning that in using them as conduits in the living realm, some have come to see him as more benevolent than their current ruler. Zero is Eli's personal guide through the realm. He's the foot soldier Eli first summoned and tended to summon during off times across the series. The nickname Zero came from Eli himself long before Season 3, but he, Eli, and Romeo travel the realm as several less docile foot soldiers pursue them, with the arc being something more philosophical than Avery's descent into madness or Clara's turn to the dark side. The real question is whether life has any purpose. Romeo finally learns about Eli's attempt to be eaten up by the flames that killed his parents, and while he understands, he's as devoted to his family as Eli is, and reminds him that his family and friends are his purpose. Though the realm and his bleakness get to Romeo as much as Eli, and the overflow of his powers become a major issue, with the massive skill of his overflow leading their pursuing foot soldiers right to them. Eli and Romeo are captured and presented to their pursuer's leader, a creature called Chaos the Star Eater. He plans to give Eli complete control over his fleet and shed the purgatory in his soul by forcing it and the power of the Shadow Crystal into Eli's soul. That way, Chaos would no longer be bound to his realm, and he could finally escape to wreak havoc on the living world. It's petty, but Chaos is desperate, and Eli refuses. A fight ensues, Zero is killed protecting Romeo. Eli is forced to absorb the whole of Purgatory when Chaos corners him, and with that power, Eli brings Chaos close to death, deciding that yes, life is better than any of the shit he'd have to endure in Purgatorio. The villain's flimsy plan in ruins, Eli expels the Purgatorio from his soul and chains the Shadow Crystal back on Chaos. But with all of the power expelled from his soul, Eli falls back into a coma. Since the coma he'd fallen into years before was only ended because of the Purgatorio binding his soul together. Chaos, being a dick, refuses to save Eli, and after being held together on borrowed time for so long, Eli finally dies, leaving Romeo to explain what happened to his rescuers and, later, Eli's devastated sister. Not done yet. Eli may be dead, but a lot of characters stick around past their expiration date. Eli refuses to enter the Heaven in My Universe, a massive vault of souls, making a deal with the Trinity of the Dead to keep an eye on Clara in the Death Realm. As Clara pursues her twisted version of justice as an anti-hero, Eli tries to remind her of her conscience in her past. His efforts are mostly in vain, but Clara just accepts him as annoying company that she literally can't run away from and kind of just chills with him. Eli's time with Clara runs out eventually, leaving Clara alone and feeling the loss of Eli in full. Eli's mostly gone from the story for the last half of the season, although Olivia occasionally has flashbacks involving him, but his ending is a happy one. Clara makes a few deals, trades her soul around with the Trinity of the Dead, and with their permission, Eli is given life in Zero's dead body, and he returns to his sister after the final conflict of the series, bowing to Olivia as his hero before embracing her as his sister. Eli is another example of a hero with a weak sense of will creating a lot more change than one would expect at first glance. It was implied a little early on, but Eli designed the costumes for his team and went on to fashion hundreds of uniforms for different Rising Hero teams, creating an entire profession in his death to be taken up by even more skilled designers. It's a lesser expansion of hero culture, obviously, but Eli really shaped heroic fashion, embracing some of the more elegant touches and more marketable things like capes, while also valuing practicality as a hero himself. He's definitely like a second or third heart on the team, acting as an older brother to several of the characters despite his various insecurities and shortcomings. Unlike the turn to evil or moral grayness that the other team members like Clara Barton and even his own sister fell into, his traumas never stopped him from pursuing the safety of the people that mattered to him. He's really not a vital character by any means, but it's because of characters like him on the team that their heroic occupation isn't just an occupation. It's a place where even the most messed up people can find a way to fit in, where appreciation, support, and platonic love can thrive as the foundation for their found family. Oh, and the existential debates about death are an added bonus, of course, and to give Olivia a reason to find any means to stay in Chicago rather than enter the foster system, a desire that ultimately leads to the unraveling and downward spiral of a far more interesting character we'll be discussing in the next video. But hey, that's pretty much it for me today. As per usual, thank you for sticking around. My channel at this point is really just for me to document my stories with a few more audience-based videos in between, so thank you for bearing with me. I do plan to release more videos for you guys in the future. I might want to do a huge 2022 movie review, just doing a lightning round of the movies I saw this year. I may redesign a couple of characters, do a little bit more fan-arty stuff, even if that's not really my thing. And hey, I have been having a lot of fun writing music recently, so I might be releasing more content like that, just to throw in something more interesting, more experimental stuff for the YouTube algorithm, I guess. But anyway, that's going to be it for me today. Thanks for sticking with me for a more personal video, although honestly, I made it about as personal as my other videos for your sake. But anyway, this is V for Verbatim signing off until the next video. Take care and be excellent to each other. Bye!